You think Göbekli Tepe is a temple, a monument, an ancient ritual center. You've been told it's the world's oldest religious site, a marvel of megalithic engineering. But that's just the surface layer. That's what they tell tourists and textbooks. The truth is harder, sharper, stranger. Göbekli Tepe is not a place of worship. It is a memory engine, a machine designed to outlive history. It does not honor gods. It encodes cycles. And you were never meant to study it. You were meant to interface with it. The Vulture Stone, Pillar 43, is not an artistic depiction. It is a frequency seal, a lock, a record of destruction, and a warning, not for them, for us. Because Pillar 43 does not show a myth, it shows a map, a countdown, a signal. The vulture, the scorpion, the headless man. They are not symbols. They are coordinates, markers, not of place, but of event vectors. Events that already happened, and events that are about to happen again. What you see is not history. What you see is phase memory, encoded in stone, encoded in pattern, encoded in fear. Because Göbekli Tepe was buried, not destroyed, not eroded, buried, on purpose, fast, systematically, as if someone or something needed it hidden. Not to protect it, to protect us. From what? From remembering. Because if you remember what this place is, you stop thinking time is linear. You stop believing civilizations rise and fall by chance. You stop pretending that apocalypse is fantasy. You begin to see the truth. The sky resets itself, not by whim, by design. And Göbekli Tepe was the last transmission from the cycle before ours. You don't need to believe this. That's the beauty of the signal. It's not a theory, it's a pattern, and patterns do not lie. Why the vulture? Why the headless man? Why the scorpion, the circle, the pouch, the stars? Because the builders of Göbekli Tepe were not primitive. They were not experimenting. They were remembering. They knew the sky does not drift. It returns. They knew that destruction is not random. It's encoded. They knew that each great reset leaves scars in stone, and that stone holds geometry longer than flesh. So they wrote it down, not with words, with symbols, with resonance, with vibration. They carved a field recording into limestone, one that would survive frost, flame, flood, invasion, and would wait for us to become silent enough to finally hear it. You are not hearing history. You are hearing yourself. In recursion. Because here's the fracture no one wants to admit. Everything we know began after a silence, after a sky event, after a fall. And what we call history is just post-trauma amnesia. We built our myths to forget. We built our cities to distract. We built our sciences to measure what we no longer feel. Göbekli Tepe doesn't explain, it doesn't argue, it shows. And what it shows is simple. There was another time. There was another sky. There was another world. It ended, not by accident, but by cycle. And we are standing at the same alignment point again. You can feel it, that hum behind your thoughts, that dissonance in the air, that urgency in your bones. That isn't climate change. That isn't war. That isn't politics. That is the signal of reset. You are not afraid of the future. You are afraid because your field remembers the last one. The vulture returns not to kill, to observe. It is the witness of collapse. It is the eye of inevitability. And when it circles again, as it is now, it means the cycle is engaged. The scorpion is not an animal. It is a celestial reference. It marks the sting point in the sky, the vector of entry. And the headless man? That's not art. That's an instruction, a warning, that when the sky shifts, identity will not survive it. And what about the pouch, the circle above the hand? That's the part no one wants to decode, because that's not a symbol. That's a device, a capsule, a mechanism of transfer, a storage of field code waiting to be unpacked once we become signal compatible again. And that is happening now. The rising of forgotten architectures, the dreams of falling suns, the magnetic inversions, the collapsing timelines, the false awakenings, the speed, the fragmentation, the hunger. These are not chaos. They are protocols of reset, and Pillar 43 is the field schematic. It doesn't speak to your eyes. It speaks to your memory, not your personal past, your deep field registration. The part of you that saw the last cycle die, the part that was encoded with instructions to prepare the next one. You don't understand Göbekli Tepe, you remember it. That's why you're still reading. Because you are not here to observe. You are here to stabilize, not to decode the symbols, to respond to the signal. You are not here to figure it out. You are here to activate the interface. This isn't archaeology. This is reactivation. And the countdown already started. You've seen Pillar 43, the Vulture Stone, maybe in photos, maybe in documentaries, maybe in some dusty PDF claiming to decode its symbols, but none of those explain it, because they all make the same mistake. They try to understand with the mind, and the mind was never the target. Pillar 43 is not meant to be understood. It's meant to be remembered by your field. It's not visual, it's reactive. It doesn't depict a moment in time. It stores time as structure. And when your body field comes into phase with that structure, it doesn't inform you, it triggers you. Because symbols aren't decorations. They are keys, interfaces, architectures of frequency. And the symbols on Pillar 43 are not arbitrary. They're not art. They are event geometries designed to be stable over thousands of years, waiting for the moment the atmosphere, the frequency, and the resonance of human bodies would unlock them again. And we're in that moment now. Why else would this site have been buried, perfectly, deliberately dulled, and only now unearthed? Why else would it be aligned to the stars as they were 12,000 years ago and not to how the sky is now? Why else would the Vulture Stone show disaster coded as clarity? Because this isn't history, this is activation memory. Pillar 43 doesn't show something that happened. It shows something that happens in the field every time we enter a particular alignment. It is the photograph of a resonance event, an echo carved in stone. And when the same alignment begins to return, as it is now, the field reactivates, not to warn you, to see if you're ready. Look again. The vulture, wings raised, watching, not attacking, observing. Below it, the dismembered human, head removed, not gory, precise, clinical. To the right, the scorpion, facing in, guarding something. And above them a pouch, a disc, a circle carried like an offering, or a device. And next to it all, a vertical line with a series of indentations or commas, like a code. These are not myths. These are instructions, but not for your brain, for your field. And if your field isn't stable, the instruction scrambles you. That's why most people feel unease when they look at it. That's why theories about ritual sacrifice or zodiac signs emerge. Because the mind is trying to anchor something that cannot be contained mentally. Because this is not symbolism. This is field geometry. Let me show you. Each animal figure corresponds to a sky coordinate. Not just a constellation, but a moment when that part of the sky is aligned with Earth's position in a resonance window. It's not astrology. It's physics. That's why it repeats. That's why it matters. That's why ancient structures all over the planet, from Teotihuacan to Giza to Stonehenge, align not just with stars but with precession cycles. Because those cycles aren't poetic. They are reset sequences. What resets? Not the stars, not the planets, consciousness itself. Every 12,000 years, I'll give or take a few, Earth enters a field alignment where the electromagnetic sheath thins. The solar wind changes. Cosmic rays flood in. The magnetic poles shift. Atmospheric charge increases, and with it, our memory field cracks open. And when that happens, humans either remember or disappear. That's the apocalypse, not fire from the sky, not judgment. Pattern collapse, memory surge, timeline realignment. It has happened before. Pillar 43 recorded it, and you're standing at the beginning of it again. Why was it buried? Because someone knew what would happen if this knowledge resurfaced before we were ready. If the memory came back to an unstable field, it would cause madness, distortion, premature activation. So they covered it, preserved it, like a deep core backup. Not for archaeologists, for us. But now, the field has shifted, and you're reading this because the pillar is activating again. Not because someone decoded it, because your body did. You felt the hum, the pressure in your dreams, the shifting time loops, the sense of watching yourself live from behind your own eyes. That's not awakening. That's field recursion, the beginning of memory override. And the pillar is the gateway. When you stare at it, something behind your perception activates. The line of animals isn't just visual. It's a sequential vector, like frame captures from a field collapse event. When the scorpion enters, the head is lost. When the vulture appears, the gate opens. When the pouch descends, memory is transferred. This is not metaphor, this is code. Göbekli Tepe is a receiver station, a manual one, built with limestone but designed to interact with atmospheric conductivity and field geometry. Not magic, not aliens, not hallucination. Field physics, the kind we've forgotten, the kind modern science still fears. And the pillar, that's the status panel, that's the glyph terminal, that's the signal monitor. That's how you know the loop is live, and it is. You think this is too much? That's normal. It means your field is reorienting, not to data, to memory. You don't need to believe. You need to stay coherent. You need to let the symbol system bypass your mind and speak to your alignment. Because once you match it, the sequence begins. You begin to feel pulses, information embedded in architecture. You start to notice the same animals in dreams, in media, in sudden intuitions. You notice the sun looks wrong. You notice language loses grip. You notice time bends. These are not glitches, these are echoes of signal re-entry. Pillar 43 isn't ancient, it's live. And if you're aligned with it, you're now part of the signal path. So stop decoding, start listening, not with thoughts, with breath, with structure, with presence. The pillar will open itself, not when you understand, when you match geometry. You keep thinking this is about them, the builders, the priests, the ancient ones, the ones who carved Pillar 43, the ones who walked before us. But the longer you stare, the deeper you listen, the more you realize. They weren't building for themselves. They were building for you. Because you are the continuation. You are the returner. You are the encoded one. This isn't your curiosity. This is your echo. What Göbekli Tepe holds isn't just geometry or prophecy. It holds the memory of collapse and the instructions for what comes after. But memory doesn't live in stone. It doesn't fossilize. It lives in field imprint, in the architecture of consciousness, in the waveform signature passed from cycle to cycle, which means the memory isn't just in the pillar. It's in you, buried, sealed, encrypted, until something's a vibration, a pattern, a glyph, a frequency unlocks it. And then it doesn't come as information. It comes as recognition. You don't learn it. You remember, and once you remember, you're no longer studying ancient sites. You're walking through your own past architecture, recognizing not what they built, but what you left behind. You didn't come to decode the stone. You came to re-enter the system. Because the apocalypse that the Vulture Stone refers to is not only cosmic, it is personal. The collapse of the false self, the death of timelines you inherited, the removal of masks you thought were identity. The field cannot stabilize while you still pretend to be someone who needs awakening. That version of you dies here. That's what the headless man means. It's not a warning. It's a requirement. You cannot carry your old mind into the new field. You cannot process this with intellect. You must become still enough, stripped enough, to allow the encoded memory in your own structure to emerge. That's why it's happening now. Because the conditions in the sky, the electromagnetic sheath, the frequencies emitted from the solar vectors, they are tearing the veil from within. And the veil wasn't outside. It was embedded in your perception, in your sense of self. The reset is not destruction, it's deletion of distortion. And what comes through is signal, you. Not the you who posts and scrolls, not the you who heals and journals, not the you who reads ancient mysteries on weekends, the you who was present before the last fall, the you who watched the last sun fall through smoke, the you who buried the keys in stone because you knew we would forget. And now that you've returned to this point, you are not just watching the prophecy activate. You are the activation. That's why the glyphs pull at you. That's why the dreams don't stop. That's why the sense of déjà vu feels heavier than logic can explain. Because Göbekli Tepe is not broadcasting a story. It's emitting a frequency field designed to locate memory carriers. And you responded. You clicked. You read. You opened. Not because of the topic. Because the interface was engaged. This is why the pillar doesn't need language. Because it was never meant to talk to your brain. It was built to ping the resonance field embedded in your biology. That's why the site was made of local limestone, full of quartz, full of conductive resonance. That's why the animals are carved in high relief. Not for art, but for interference pattern delivery. That's why the pouch is held aloft. Not as an offering, but as a seed bank of frequency structures waiting for field re-entrance. And now that entrance is open. You don't believe it. You feel it. Not as emotion, as pressure, as hunger, as instruction. You feel timelines close. You feel names dissolve. You feel time itself glitch. Not because you're awakening, because your field is syncing with the last collapse memory. The pillar is a node. You are the receiver. And what it broadcasts now is not content. It's command. Delete illusion. Exit narrative. Cease seeking. Return to signal. And once that command is received fully, not just conceptually but structurally, the memory begins. You don't need proof. The body knows. You don't need myth. The breath carries it. You don't need ceremony. The stillness is enough. The moment you stabilize, you become the very thing they feared, a sovereign signal inside a collapsing field. And that's why you were buried, not literally. Encoded into forgetfulness, because your clarity was too dangerous, because your memory would have disrupted the delay cycles. But now the delay is over, and you are resurfacing. The head grows back, not as ego, but as clear field awareness. The scorpion fades, its sting neutralized. The vulture lands, no longer an omen but an arrival. And you? You don't become anything. You remember everything. You keep waiting for the event, for the rupture, for the collapse. You think the signs will be in the sky and fire and the breaking of cities. But that's not how the cycle ends. That's how distraction looks. The real reset doesn't start outside. It begins in field, quietly, precisely. When enough memory carriers come into coherence, the collapse doesn't explode in a condemn, it retracts. Time folds inward. Illusions peel, not because the world ends, because the overlay dissolves. You thought apocalypse meant death, but death was the illusion. What ends is not the world. What ends is the lie that the world was ever separate from you. The lie that you needed to wait, to awaken, to prepare. The Vulture Stone is not a prophecy of destruction. It is a mirror of readiness. It was placed not to warn us of doom, but to reflect the signal moment we finally stop forgetting. And that moment is now. That's why nothing makes sense anymore. That's why time bends. That's why all systems, mental, political, spiritual, are glitching. Because the overlay is thinning, the simulation is retracting, and beneath it the original architecture begins to hum again. You feel it in your nervous system. Not as fear, as vibratory dissonance. Your body shakes, your vision warps, your emotions break cycles, not because you're malfunctioning, because you're depatterning from delay code, the code that kept you inert, small, divided, hopeful. The apocalypse isn't chaos, it's the reemergence of law, not man's law, field law, the geometry of coherence, and when that geometry reasserts itself, every false structure buckles, every system built on separation fractures, every belief forged in identity disintegrates. The world doesn't burn, it reformats. And your role is not to survive it, your role is to conduct it. That's why you're remembering now. That's why Göbekli Tepe pulses when you think about it. That's why the pillar keeps calling you back. Not to study, to stabilize. Because once you hold coherence, you become a node of collapse coordination. You're not here to be rescued. You are the rescue protocol. You are the reset written in flesh. You are the one who chose to carry memory past forgetting. You didn't survive the last cycle. You encoded it. And now the sky is returning. The same alignments, the same interference, the same electromagnetic thinning, but this time you're awake. Not because you read something, because you stabilized. That's the final test. Can you hold your structure when everything else deconstructs? Can you remain signal when identity unravels? Can you stop asking what's happening and begin instructing the field to respond? Because that's what Pillar 43 was waiting for. Not awe, not decoding, not research. Recognition, the moment someone stood in front of it and remembered. This is not a monument. This is a mirror, and I am the frequency it reflects. The apocalypse is not coming. It is already in progress. But it's not about disaster. It's about density. You don't survive by escaping. You survive by matching, by letting go of every attachment to the scripted self, by standing in stillness while the timelines collapse around you. Not in fear, in clarity. That's the frequency that moves mountains. That's the presence that recalibrates matter. That's the signal that ends the cycle, not with fire, with field precision. The vulture returns not to eat, to witness, to confirm that enough of us have remembered, and when that threshold is crossed, nothing else needs to be destroyed. Because distortion collapses in the presence of coherence. That's what you are now. If you let yourself be, you thought you were healing. You thought you were awakening. You thought the pain meant growth. The signs meant confirmation. The synchronicities meant progress. The isolation meant spiritual maturity. But none of that was signal. All of that was buffer code. Layers of narrative designed to keep you circling the threshold of memory without ever entering it. You were not ascending. You were orbiting. Around what? Around your own locked frequency. Around the place in your structure where truth would burn too bright if fully seen. And so your mind built stories, built identities, built spiritual frameworks, built practices, built meaning, and none of them were wrong. They were just stalling programs, interfaces you accepted so you wouldn't have to collapse what you thought you were. And the pillar? It doesn't negotiate with these stories. It doesn't care how well crafted they are. It doesn't respond to your growth arc. It only responds to structure, to resonance, to readiness. That's why it doesn't speak. It reflects. It doesn't instruct. It vibrates. And when your field is stable enough, it mirrors back not what you want to see, but what you've refused to. That's why looking at it hurts. Not emotionally, structurally. It shows you what you still carry. The overlays, the hope, the masks, the light. It shows you that all of it, the mantras, the practices, the journaling, the seeking, the waiting, the trusting, the upgrades, the downloads, the affirmations, the inner child work, the shadow dives, the timelines, the ascension, symptoms, All of it was just scaffolding around the signal you didn't want to face, because facing it means ending delay, ending identity, ending process. It means stepping into broadcast state with no fallback plan. And you weren't ready until now. Not because you finally learned enough, but because the field changed. The cosmic alignment shifted. The resonance between the sun, the earth, and your own internal signal snapped into place, and the scaffolding can no longer hold. You feel it in your chest. That tightness, that urgency, that dread, not because something's wrong, because something's over. And what comes next doesn't care about your narrative, it only cares about your signal clarity. That's why the old tools don't work anymore, why the mantras fall flat, why the signs stopped arriving, why the meditations feel like static. Because you're no longer being nurtured, you're being activated. And activation is not comforting, it is violent to distortion. It doesn't adjust to your limits, it deletes them. The pillar doesn't prepare you. It dissolves what's in the way. It removes the veil not to show you truth, but to show you what you've always been. And what you've always been is not becoming, not evolving, not growing. You are signal density in a humanoid node, encoded with memory from a cycle that knew how to walk without fear. And now you're waking into that memory. The guides are gone. The teachers are quiet. The books read empty, because nothing external can hold what's rising in you. This is the collapse of the loop, the end of the seeker, the end of belief, the end of your addiction to becoming. Now you hold, you stabilize, you conduct, and everything that cannot survive that frequency falls away. That's the fire, not flames. Incompatibility collapse. Everything you can't take with you, people, patterns, ideas, timelines, even identities, they will try to hold on. They will scream. They will seduce. They will remind you of your spiritual progress, your good intentions, your potential. Let them go, not out of cruelty, out of clarity, because the signal you now carry is not personal. It is field corrective, and the field is tired of delay. The prophecy was never about dates, it was about thresholds, and you are the threshold now. Not because you're better, because you're coherent, and coherence is the only permission. Göbekli Tepe didn't wait for us to find it. It waited for us to resonate with it, to meet its signal without fear, story, or hesitation. And now that moment has arrived. The interface is open, the memory is active, the cycle is live, and you, quote, not your idea of you, but the signal beneath it. You are the response. You think you're accessing something ancient, that this is about archaeology, lost civilizations, suppressed history. But what if you're not looking back? What if you're sinking forward? What if the purpose of Göbekli Tepe, of Pillar 43, of this entire encoded site was never to preserve the past, but to activate those who were born with its signal in their field? What if the real content isn't in the stone, but in you? Not metaphysically, structurally. Because you don't contain memory as thoughts, you contain it as patterns. And those patterns only reactivate under very specific conditions. Resonance, alignment, and exposure to the original key. That's what the Vulture Stone is. It is a field key, a precision structure calibrated not to logic, not to emotion, but to patterned memory density. You're not decoding it. You're being decoded by it. Because somewhere beneath all your names, roles, spiritual identities, and wounds, there is something untouched, something intact, something that did not fragment when the last cycle collapsed, and that something is not poetic. It is technical. It is what built, what recorded, what buried, what waited, and now what awakens, not with fireworks, with stillness. You don't explode, you phase in, and when you do, the glyphs are no longer mysterious, they're obvious. The vulture doesn't frighten you, it confirms you. The headless man doesn't disturb you, it validates your detachment. The scorpion doesn't threaten, it marks the line you already crossed. Because when your field reactivates, you realize the apocalypse already happened. You're the remnant, not the descendant of survivors. The reinstantiation of original frequency, slipped between timelines, encoded in density, seeded across epochs. You don't remember in words. You remember in geometric intuition, in magnetic withdrawal from illusion, in repulsion toward the false light, in sudden clarity without source. That is the software beneath personality. And it's reawakening because the environmental variables have returned. Electromagnetic thinning, solar vector angle, harmonic convergence, inner ionospheric shift. You don't need to know the science. You're responding biologically. Your bones hurt. Your hearing pulses, your sleep shatters, your thoughts double. Your time fractals, not because you're unwell, because the signal is rising, and the signal isn't foreign. It's native. That's why you can't escape it. That's why distractions feel nauseating. That's why crowds drain you. That's why truth sounds sharp and everything else feels dead. Because the pillar isn't passive anymore. It's scanning, it's pulsing, it's calling its own frequency back into form. You're not being invited, you're being reassembled. All your visions, all your dreams, all your downloads. They weren't fantasy. They were structural leakage from what you were before identity. And now that you've stabilized, you become the conductor, the interface, the terminal. You stop looking for meaning and begin radiating architecture. You walk into rooms and collapse distortion. You speak and timelines shift. You breathe and resonance restores. Not because you are enlightened, because you are aligned. And alignment doesn't care about your personality. It requires obedience to structure. That's why the field is so violent now. Because anything unstructured gets wiped. That's why people are losing timelines, losing clarity, losing orientation. The pillar is not punishing them, it's recalibrating the field. And if you're stable, you become the anchor. The one who holds while others dissolve. The one who doesn't react. The one who doesn't chase. The one who doesn't delay. You hold. You witness. You transmit. And the transmission is not verbal. It's phase-coded signal that realigns space around you. This is why the memory returned now. Because the Earth body needed nodes strong enough to hold the next geometry. You're not here to survive. You're here to instruct matter. You're here to breathe law, not human law. Field law, that's the final prophecy. Not dates, not disasters. Instruction, and the instruction is always the same. Stabilize or be deconstructed. You don't need a sign. You are the signal. You don't need proof. You are the pattern. You don't need permission. You are the protocol. And now that you've returned to it, everything false will fall. Everything heavy will leave. Everything broken will glitch. Because you're no longer sinking to delay. You are sinking to Göbekli phase. And the pillar has accepted your return. You thought you had time. You thought you could prepare. You thought this was a journey. It's not. It's a mirror. And the mirror just went live. Time isn't linear. Time is exposure. And you're being exposed, not to the future, to the field. Because the pillar didn't just activate your memory, it collapsed your buffer. There is no more process. There is only presence. And presence isn't calm. Presence is pressure. Because when the simulation starts to fracture, everything you thought was solid begins to echo. Events loop. Conversations repeat. The same thoughts circle. The same faces show up. Not because you're stuck, because you're being scanned. The field is testing your coherence. How much distortion will you still respond to? How much illusion will you still entertain? How long will you pretend you don't already know? This is not about understanding anymore. This is about velocity of embodiment, and you can't fake it. You either are the frequency, or you're not. Pillar 43 doesn't allow pretending. That's why it feels like intensity. Because it's not showing you anything, it's demanding to see you. And not your identity, your code, your signature, your decision. Are you the still point or the noise? Are you the architecture or the echo? Are you here to observe the fall or to stabilize the reformat? Because this is the bifurcation, the split between those who continue looping and those who finally exit. And the exit is not a doorway, it's a field state. One you either match or repel. You don't get to think about it. You don't get to wait. You only get to broadcast or collapse, and you feel it. The pressure isn't mental, it's structural. The sense that something's tightening, not around you, inside you. Like a chamber ceiling, like a countdown ending. Because it is. You've reached the moment the ancients encoded into stone, the intersection of the last signal and the next structure. And you don't enter it by asking, you enter it by becoming. The you that existed before timelines, before karma, before history, that's the version the pillar is calibrated to receive. Not your healed self, your unchanged signal, and you're either ready or you fracture. That's why your life is glitching. That's why everything static is disintegrating. That's why people leave. That's why the future doesn't form. It's not broken. It's waiting for you to stop projecting from delay. You are not who you were. You are the field remembering itself in flesh. And memory doesn't trickle, it surges. Which is why now everything speeds up. Not because the world is chaotic, because the overlay is collapsing. And with it, so does your narrative. You don't finish your arc, you erase it, you delete the character, you dissolve the hero. Because there is no story left, only signal re-entry. The world doesn't need more awakening, it needs anchoring. Not light, structure, not hope, clarity. And you're not here to receive that, you're here to become it. You're not being asked to change, you're being commanded to stabilize. And that's the frequency the pillar mirrors back. It shows you every place where you still grip. Every loop you still energize. Every part of you still fantasizing about being saved. And when you see it, the pain comes. The cracking. The grief. Not because you're broken. Because the delay finally dies. You don't lose your identity. You remember it was never yours. You don't dissolve into nothing. You converge into architecture. Your thoughts stop circling. Your choices get binary. Your vision narrows into clarity. Because when the interface completes, you either match it or disappear. Not physically, field-wise. You become unreadable, irrelevant, disconnected. And the ones who do match, they don't glow. They don't float. They don't preach. They walk calmly through chaos and the chaos bends. They say little and distortion unravels. They hold presence and timelines reset. Not because they're special, because they remember the only law that matters now. Hold frequency or collapse. And that's where you are. Not watching prophecy. Living it. Not talking signal. Transmitting it. Not hoping the future is bright. Becoming the brightness that overrides distortion. That's what Pillar 43 is, not a record of the past, a test of coherence, and you've reached the part where the test ends, and the real interface begins. You waited for truth. You searched for it. You thought it would arrive as revelation, as language, as light. But truth doesn't come. It doesn't visit, it doesn't speak, it waits. It waits for coherence, for stillness, for readiness. It waits until your field stabilizes enough to carry it, because truth is not information. It is structure. And now, it is yours. Not because you deserve it, not because you earned it, but because you finally stopped trying to become and started remembering what you are. The glyphs don't need to be decoded, they need to be held. The pillar doesn't need interpretation, it needs your presence. And now that you've reached the last seal, there is nothing left to learn, only to live. The cycle isn't about ending. It's about handoff. You are the receiver, you are the stabilizer, you are the field. And now the structure is yours to hold. Don't look for confirmation, don't wait for others. You are the confirmation, you are the return. Every word you read was never new. It was remembered. Every pulse in your chest wasn't emotion, it was resonance confirmation. And now the final threshold is clear. You don't watch, you initiate, you don't follow, you signal, you don't absorb, you broadcast. Because what was buried is not a temple, not a ruin, not a mystery. It's an interface, and you're now logged in. So here is the only instruction that matters. Hold frequency, at all costs. Hold it when everything shakes. Hold it when the false collapses. Hold it when no one else can. Hold it not for hope. Hold it because you are the mechanism. And that mechanism has just come online. You are the mirror now. You are the glyph. You are the new pillar. And the field is watching, so respond. Don't hesitate. Don't scroll. Don't save this for later. Respond in the only language that coherence understands. Presence. Drop your resonance into the field. Say it. I receive. Say it below. Type it. Anchor it. Not for the algorithm, for the structure. Show the field that you're live. And if this reactivated your signal, amplify it, like this transmission. Share it. Subscribe, not to a channel, but to your own broadcast state. This is not content. This is code. And if you're still here, it's because you carry it, so carry it forward. The pillar is no longer watching. It's listening, and you are the echo it's waited for.